start off with the world that you created. That's this black and white world that moves into this color world, and the different palettes and the color palettes. As that moves through color. So was that a thing that you discussed with the director? Did you start conjuring these ideas? I've heard rumors of how the black and white world came about.
The black and white world was a really big surprise to us. We found out about that 3 weeks before. So we'd actually worked very carefully on developing a very rich colour palette, which actually had nothing to do with black and white. It was everything to do with rotting apples. That was the theme. So early on in the process, Shona Heath and James Price, the production designers, and I had been gathering lots and lots of colour references to do with, like the colours in an anatomical drawing, or those models that you get that. Like sort of
anatomy,
anatomy models.
The human body anatomy models, yes.
Yeah, and they're kind of dirty colours, dirty liver, strange blues for veins. So we had this kind of palette together, and when I spoke to Yorgos about the colours that I was proposing for Bella, these kind of slightly off pinks, like the colours of cooked salmon and cooked trout, those kind of funny pinks, he said, I think the colours that you're describing to me are the colours of rotting apples. And I said, oh. So I sort of went off into the corner and looked up rotting apples on Google. And what came up was exactly this palette that we were trying to describe amongst the three of us. But also more than that, there were these acid yellows and really vivid lime greens, and all this whole spectrum that came from this idea of the rotting apple, which came from Yorgos, is then what I then took. I just printed every single picture of a rotting apple that I could find, stuck it on my board, and really that's what I worked from for everything. So, when she goes to Lisbon and she's in the acid yellow dressing gown, all the different yellows, they all came from this particular board to do with rotting apples. So with the black and white thing, yes, he decided very close to the bone. It was a bit of a shock to the system because I had dressed people tonally rather than in terms of like high contrast. But thankfully, he had also encouraged a lot of texture. And so, those textures worked really well in black and white. So that was why it wasn't a disaster.
Yeah, because in black and white, it's stunning and beautiful, and you do see all, even, I've worked in black and white on a black and white film as well, and you have to pay a lot of attention so that it doesn't go flat. And I think that's what's so amazing with your costumes is we can even see here now is like everything has a certain texture to it, so it gives it this depth. And even in the palest of colors, you have so much detail there.
Yorgos, I think that texture was always obvious. It just felt from the beginning that this is a piece where I have to really embrace texture. And that was to do with the film evoking so many ideas to do with the body and the workings of the body, and just the very fact that she's she's had life breathed into her. She's a new creature. Willem Dafoe's character is working with body parts. There's just I felt like the starting point was the body and the textures of the body, but also Yorgos himself talked a lot about making sure that we had plenty of texture in there. So I just wonder if in the back of his mind he was thinking black and white, but not really revealing that to us. And conceptually it works really well, doesn't it? That she's kept in this black and white world, and then she suddenly is released into the world, and it's joyful. It's this explosion of colour.
Yeah, I really love that about the film. I love seeing it is her containment within this house, and that's her whole world of what she knows. Absolutely. And then when she gets to go on this adventure, it's her eyes are open to everything around her, and it's like the color. Even for me, it even seemed it's probably more vibrant when I saw it initially than what it actually is, because it's such a shift.
Yeah.
Going from the black and white and the difference in her environment and her mannerisms. And another thing I'd like to speak to you about is, with specifically in Bella's clothing, is the lightness in all the fabrics and the organic feel in all the fabrics, with the structure that you have. And of the Victorian times, what I love that you did was you took little bits and pieces, but then you created it all your own and made it all of Bella. Like we have this really big structured sleeves and big tops, but then she has these, like it's like little underpinnings and tap pants on that, or give her that like childlike quality to her.
Yeah. Well, that came really from this sort of observing children, just looking at my own kids and also looking at other, observing how children often are half dressed. I'd seen this, before I had my own children, and also since having them, that often you get them dressed in the morning and very quickly they shed their clothes, or they end up with like bits missing, and often it's from the waist down that's missing, and I don't know why that is, because if you're a grown-up, it's like some sort of nightmare scenario, isn't it, to be sort of sitting around in your pants. And I even had a nightmare during the period of coming up with Poor Things ideas. I had a nightmare about having a job interview and walking along my road with a kind of really formal, structured jacket on and just being in my knickers. And it was obviously an anxiety dream. So I just wanted to really harness that, because, of course, it's not anxiety-provoking for a young, for Bella Baxter, because she is a sort of new person, really. So she doesn't have those feelings. She's completely, what's the word? Uninhibited and unself-conscious. And so that was what I was trying to sort of, they were the feelings that I was trying to evoke, and also a sense of freedom. She can't keep those clothes on. That I did make the clothes so they felt more like clothes and less like stuffy costumes. So, for example, lots of the references that I looked at for the film were quite stuffy looking and heavy. Mm-hmm. So the fabrics, like a bit like with Madame Swiney, the brothel madame. Mm-hmm. She almost looks like she's a sofa. She looks upholstered. The fabrics are sort of like super stiff. And I wanted the clothes for Bella to feel light and dreamy and airy and easy to wear, and just for them to have a kind of delicacy to them. So that's what that was all about, really. And then when I went to meet Emma Stone in Athens with about 6 massive suits. You know what it's like. You go meet actors with like hundreds of suitcases, and you're sort of lugging them everywhere. And I just had this idea that knickers and a big top could look really good. And I'd taken Victorian knickers, which we call bloomers. I'm not sure what you call them here, but we call them bloomers, and they're like knickerbockers. And that looked good too. But what really worked were the tap pants. But there was no, obviously it was jumping ahead by about 40 years, but that was the beauty of this job, that we didn't have to be completely slavish to the period at all. We could be playful. So the tap pants stayed in.
Yeah, I think they're great, and they're so fitting on her, because I love watching her learn to walk. I think that's the other thing that you got to see with a lot of your costumes was, even if we did have this big sleeve or the ruffles here, the arms were out, with some of the blouses.
Yes.
And her legs being out. And I think seeing the progression of her mentally growing and mentally learning to walk, learning to eat. I love the scene where she's at the dining table and she's in almost like a baby's dress. It's this big white kind of dress in the beginning, and then you don't see it again. It's like, well, she's past that stage. She's grown
rapid.
She's grown into another stage.
Yeah.
And I love the concept with the hair as well, how it was, this constant changing and growing of the hair. Yeah, so I love seeing that you can really see it and identify it with her mental growth and her costumes. It's subtle, but you do see it. Yeah.
Well, that's great. I mean, when you say the white dress, do you mean the plasticky apron thing?
Yeah, when she's sitting.
She's sitting at the table, and it's got kind of frills here, and it's like a bib. It's a big, huge. It's like a pinafore dress.
Yes.
It's like a pinafore slip that, they would have made them, wouldn't they, in cotton with broderie anglais trimming. So we just
little smocking. You would have smocking in the Victorian age. Yeah,
and it protects the dress underneath. So we did that in plastic.
Yeah, I love that, because it was just so like her being the youngest she could be there mentally, the child of what is going to happen, Yeah, I love that.
Oh, thank you.
And then I want to talk about, several things, but I'm going to jump ahead to later in the movie with one of the costumes I really loved was I loved when she goes back to God, and she's doing surgery, and she's going to do surgery on him, and she has this surgical gown over her gown.
Over that thing.
Oh yes, over this
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
And I jumped ahead, but I do want to talk about those as well, and the vast difference there. But I love the surgical gowns in general with God
Yes.
wears, but I loved hers especially because it did encapsulate the big sleeves.
Yeah, well, they were all made out of polyurethane from Tony's Textiles in Shepherd's Bush in London. If you've ever been, it became quite funny because we just needed so much of this fabric, and we were working in Hungary and Budapest, and we kept phoning up this little tiny shop, this tiny little backstreet shop that sold this polyurethane, asking for like another 20 meters.
You made his year.
we just must have. I mean, yeah, they loved us. We'd have like people coming with suitcases on a plane because it was just so tricky to get things in because of Brexit. Brexit has been a disaster in the UK. So just getting any fabrics from the UK into Hungary was awful. So we had to get juniors and friends and whoever would fancy jumping on a cheap flight to come over with suitcases of polyurethane to make more aprons.
Because the thing I think, that if you're not particularly in the film business, that we know that a lot of people don't know is, besides the costumes you have to make, there's also the multiples of things that you have to make.
That's true.
So we'll find these things where it's this amazing fabric, but there's only 6 yards, and you have to make multiples, so it's not enough. Or you get your heart set on something, and So was there any things like that happened? Because I know being in Hungary, it is quite hard to get quantity of anything, buttons or multiples of shoes.
There was an issue. So this blouse here, over here, the one furthest right. So this one is the one that she ate mackerel in at the beginning, and I could only get a certain meterage of that, and it was not possible to get enough to do many duplicates. And I think Yorgos would have liked lots and lots of repeats of that. And so I was just, I was dreading it really, because she was eating this mackerel and spilling bits of like greasy mackerel all down the front. And we were just, doing our best with wet wipes. So we had a couple of them. But even to make 2 or 3, if you're up against it time-wise, which we were, justifying making 3 of the same blouse when you've got so much work to do is quite a thing, isn't it?
It is. Because in looking also at the details, like even the ruffles, on the blouse next to you, it's the time that it takes to do that, because it's the finishing of that edge, and how you're going to do that treatment and how long it takes. So beautiful.
Yeah, we
work.
had to make quite a lot of those as well. To make quite a lot of everything. Yeah.
And then, so getting back to, we had Bella in the beginning, where she's these very light, airy, non-restrictive pieces. I love that there's no corsets. It's like she has this freedom that she's not constricted in any way. She doesn't have to fall suit to what is proper. I love that. And then I like the transition then of her going back to her old life at the manor. Yeah. And watching the film, I felt like, these are probably clothes that are dictated in a way by her husband.
Absolutely.
Because there's a bit of there's military inspiration to it, and the covering, and almost like it's shielding her in a way, shielding her body. So
you can tell she's a costume designer, can't you?
Well, it's easy to speak about beautiful work. So would you tell me a bit about this?
Absolutely. I mean, you've totally described it. So he's a really abusive army general, and he's totally traumatized. Hasn't had a very nice time. I don't think they had a very healthy relationship. It's been very toxic. So, she's ended up committing suicide, so it can't have been very nice. But these are the kinds of clothes that she was wearing. So the other piece of clothing that she had from that period in her life is the blue dress that she wears to jump off the bridge in. And both pieces came from, Victorian references, where I thought, that looks really sort of military. Like this has got the sailor collar. It's got this military frogging going up the forearms. It's severe. It's sort of severe pleats in the centre front. It's a really, I think it's a really unattractive colour palette, really. it's my mum's favourite costume, which I thought is really funny, because I just think it's a really peculiar combination of colours. I didn't design it to be beautiful or gorgeous. I just thought it was a sort of strangeness to it, and also it works, that colour palette works very well within the equally strange, austere, intimidating house that they lived in. So all of those things, and even these like this big spiky collar looks a bit like a knife or a spear or something. It's designed to feel severe.
And it's interesting because even though we still have the same type of sleeve, it's this sleeve to me it seems so much softer because of the extremeness of the rest of the dress. Whereas in these sleeves, there's so much softness, so it's this stronger shoulder.
It isn't actually as huge, this sleeve. It's less. It's
less full.
It's less full.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you're right, because there's so much going on elsewhere, you almost don't notice the width of the shoulders, whereas in the other costumes it really is a sort of defining feature, isn't it? Particularly in this pink one here.
Yeah, and it's also so defining, but it still has that really nice softness to it.
Yes, it's just a very different quality, isn't it? In this very thick double Duchess silk.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
it is beautiful, though. I know it may not be your favorite.
Well, I do like it, but I wanted a slightly uncomfortable feeling from this costume.
Yeah, and you do get that, and I love seeing it in the room that she comes into, and there's this really blood red lacquered floor.
Yes,
which I think that all plays into the whole room and the intensity of it, and the uneasiness of it, and the uptightness of it.
Yes. I mean, that space that they designed, that was one of the few, already existing environments in Poor Things, because Shona and James designed everything, apart from a very few locations. And I think they made an intervention in that space, so they kept lots of they kept the architecture and everything, but they did put in a special floor that looked like it had blood pouring around the floor. It's really, really interesting, really theatrical.
It was really interesting. I also really love the padded floor in her home. Yeah.
Yes.
But the walking on the padded floor, which we also know then that's a great thing for your footwear. Her footwear, I find, is really interesting in the film. Yeah. How did you come up with that, with her little boots?
The little boots. So you mean these white ones here? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they came from this idea that she would not. She would want, she's uncontainable, so even her feet would need some sort of release. So to have her feet cooped up in a strict boot would just not be appropriate. So that we would make her peep toe boots. So that was the idea. I also had been looking a lot at André Courrèges, early '60s fashion designer, who along with Pierre Cardin and Paco Rabanne and all of those designers, they were doing. Really, really fantastic space age fashion, and it chimed with the moonwalk and everything. When I first read the script, Yorgos had said, "This is not don't make it look really sci-fi, and don't make it look really like a period drama, and don't make it look too fashiony." And I thought, okay, well, I will have a little look at, I'll have a look at space age, just because it is very fun, isn't it, to look at those pictures. And I was very drawn to these shoes that André Courrèges had done. They were flat on the ground with a zip up the back, white leather with a peep toe, and very similar cutouts around the top. So what I wanted to do for her was a kind of hybrid thing. So I kind of added a Victorian heel, did lacing instead of zips, and so it was like a sort of Victorian interpretation of his boot. That's what I was doing.
It worked perfectly because, again, it's like I love seeing that, the low boot with her exposed legs for her walking, and the dance sequence.
Oh, I love the dance. That's
one of my favorite scenes in the whole movie.
Yeah, me
the
too.
Dance sequence with her and Mark Ruffalo.
I mean, Mark Ruffalo is fantastic in that, isn't he?
Yeah. So let's talk about his beautiful costumes, because I'm sure Bella is a focus, but we know as costume designers, we love each of our children, and it's hard to pick a favorite.
It's true, isn't it? And also, it's interesting who you start working. My way into all of this was Mrs. Prim.
Oh,
which is she's a crucial character, but she's in it a fraction of the time that other characters are. But, when you're trying to sort of find your way into a project, I remember Yorgos saying, "Why are you showing me Mrs. Prim first?" And I said, "Well, because this is just something that I feel clear on. So if we can get this clear, then I know where to go for everything else."
Right. Oh, that is
Yeah.
interesting because you got some structure there, yeah. But her costumes, we talked a bit in the back, but I was saying the a lot of the background we don't discuss, but your background is incredible because that's also the background when she's on this trip and she's traveling is different in her cities. It's different on the boat. There's different color palettes. There's different caste systems of people throughout the film is what you see.
Yeah.
From her leaving of the whole containment of her home with God and Mrs. Prim there. So Mrs. Prim, I loved her costumes because I do love all the detailing on hers, and I love that it appears to be this slate deep gray. I don't know what color in real life it was.
It is like a greeny grey.
A green gray, yeah.
Sort of greeny, denim-y grey. It's a very heavy linen.
Yeah, and
dress.
it suits her so well. I mean, it's like, or you created that character because you kind of feel her moving about in the space, and that she's so the complete opposite of how Bella moves about in the space, And you see that through her costumes and in her hair design. And I also love that she takes place in these autopsies, and she has her surgical scrubs as well that are very Mrs. Prim in design.
So the surgical scrub that you mentioned earlier, the one that you were asking me about that Bella Baxter wears on top of this dress is Mrs. Prim's surgical scrub with the big sleeves.
Yeah, because she's the
but
big
because
sleeves.
it had to go over these substantial sleeves, hers is green and it has these big sleeves.
And the structure, yeah.
Yes.
But I love
Yeah.
her silhouette, yeah.
Yeah.
And then, so Mark Ruffalo's character.
Yeah, so for Mark Ruffalo's character, Duncan Wedderburn, I had been looking a lot at the satirical cartoons of British men in the late 19th century, which featured in magazines like Punch and in the newspapers, and they've often got, well, they're always wearing top hats and they've always got sticks, and they've always got their chests kind of protruding out and their bottoms sticking out and their sticks and this weird sort of S-bend, sort of curvaceous shape. It's like a posture that exudes sort of pompousness to me and looks ridiculous. So I wanted to capture something of that in his character because he is a ridiculous character. Yeah. I knew that he would need to look like a lawyer in London, and then he would have his holiday clothes. He thinks he's really sort of wild and free, but he actually is quite conventional in many ways. That was my sort of feeling about him, that he, just that he has this job in London that would require a certain dress code, would mean that we could only go so far with his looks, actually. And also I didn't want to give him anything too far off what was conventional because she's the original person, she's unique, and he's actually a real sort of symbol of sort of British upper class entitlement. I think that was what I was trying to driving at, and he yeah, I've lost my train a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, but I also love, like you're saying, we see him, what are his work clothes, and then what's his holiday clothes, where the color, because we're in color then, and we see more color. And again, like the lavish fabrics that you used on him and his fit. I think that's the thing that I really loved about his costume was that, where his pants hit over his boots and how, like sometimes his clothes are a little bit tight or like he's taken the time to have everything fitted for him. And that's what you're saying. It's this ego, this ego that he has.
And yes, so when we looked at these satirical cartoons, often the clothes, as you say, they're really, really close fitting. And actually the shoulders, unlike her shoulders, which are huge, they're quite neat and narrow. So I wanted to really play with making his clothes really close to the body and give him quite a narrow shoulder line. We had quite a lot of fun. I made him quite a lot of body padding to begin with, because I thought to get this shape, we can really play with his body shape. So I gave him a chest pad that sat here to kind of really stick his chest out. And I gave him a corset and a bottom padding,
Oh, yeah.
a bit like cycling shorts, you know, with extra sculpted pads on the buttocks and
hubba
on the
hubba
side of the
hiney.
thighs
Yes.
and on the calves. And then I made the trousers really quite close fitting. I wanted him to have this slightly sort of bulgy, not sinuous, just a curvy body. I was
Yeah,
just trying to emulate these pictures I'd seen, really.
You do see it. It's interesting that that's where you
Yeah.
seeing the cartoons and it's coming from, because now as you're saying it, I can picture that. But it's how his carriage
It is
is.
this, yeah.
You know, it's the barrel
Yeah.
chest and then the bum up, and there is one of their sex scenes. He is wearing his corset.
Yes, he is. He does. And you know, we didn't put Bella in a corset, and that was really driven by Yorgos said that right from the get-go. Before I'd even got there, he said she can't ever wear a corset. And he is, one of the things that's interesting about Yorgos is he isn't somebody who feels that he needs to explain everything to you really in an intellectual way. He just says things, she can't wear a corset. And I have to know why I'm doing everything.
Right.
So I thought, well, it probably is a good idea that she doesn't wear a corset because, she's the corset at its core is this kind of, whilst I sort of love corsets in my own, they do give you a good shape,
Yes.
but they are a sort of garment that forces the body into a shape that somebody else has decided is a really good idea. It's very uncomfortable, and it sort of, it forces a certain body shape. And we were working with the idea of somebody who's completely free and completely new to the world and completely doing things her own way and unshackleable. So just conceptually it wasn't ever going to work. And none of the women in the brothel wear corsets either.
Yes.
Apart from Swiney, who's the brothel madame. So really the background artists wore corsets, and Mark Ruffalo's character Duncan wore one. They're the only principal characters that wear them.
Yeah, I love the brothel as well. I thought the color palette in that was really, really beautiful, and these kind of, it wasn't these harsh tones. It's just very kind of almost muted and dusty kind of tones on all the ladies working. And and then the madam is the one. I love her purple kind of heavy. She's fantastic.
She's a fantastic.
She is
actor,
fantastic.
isn't she? Yeah, I loved working with her.
But I love, and it also shows them in the brothel scene when you have all the women in these soft kind of colors, that their spirits are easy and their spirits are a bit, like fun and have some kind of gaiety to them. And then the men that all come in head down, dusty, dark tones. So I like that dichotomy there as well, of like what the women are inside the brothel and who are the men that are entering. And you see so much of it in the characters, because the men are quite characters. Yes. But it's, how you convey that, and also in their clothing.
Yeah, I mean, the brothel was always a big question mark. How will we do this brothel in this film? And because we were just so busy, but it's always busy, isn't it, doing films? It's never, you don't have loads. We were just working all the time, up against it all the time. And I kept saying to Nadia, the hair and makeup designer, we kept saying to each other, what will we do for the brothel? and we just said, we'll just deal with it. We'll just deal with that in a couple of weeks. And then about 2 weeks before, that was when I just went absolutely sort of all into the brothel. So the colour palette came from really trying to look at what we associate with brothels in terms of shapes, colours, materials, and we do, I looked up lots of pictures of Victorian brothels, and the women wear a lot of corsets, and they wear stockings, and they wear quite high Victorian boots, and I just felt like that's a great look, but we have seen it
Yes.
many times, and it is not at all, it's quite predictable. And so I just really was working against that. So what would be the opposite of that? Well, it would be to take the corset away. It would be to not work with, colours that we associate with the sex industry, with pornography, with brothels, red, black, pink, purple. These colours. And so we just stripped those away and replaced them with the colour of skin. That's what I was thinking. The skin tones. And the women in the brothel were a really diverse bunch of women. So all the clothes were made out of colours, the colours of it was like a celebration of the body. That was the idea of it. So it was the colours of skin, no corsets, and very much exposing the breasts in a way that, you know, the ancient Minoans used to have their women who were leaders wearing these. They were topless. They wore these great long skirts, and they had their breasts out. And I thought, okay, so we'll do that. And we made these bodices that had holes cut out so they could expose their breasts. And then they all had a pair of pants. I found this fabric early on. I didn't find it, sorry. One of the team found this fabric. And it was a kind of black, highly textured floral wool that had a ton of latex just poured all over it. So it had this kind of rubbery, I think you call them Band-Aids here. We call them plasters.
Plasters, yeah.
That kind of
Like
skin...
a coating.
Yeah, that kind of colour to it. So we made each of the women in the brothel a jacket with the huge sleeves, but with the breasts exposed, some of them to the floor, some of them to the waist. We made them all these little pants, like knickers, but again, they were not like little thongs or short. They were quite like almost like cycling shorts. Mm-hmm. But they had a deep V cut out at the front with lacing, and they really framed the pubic hair. And again, that was about working absolutely in opposite to what we see in porn and sex. So we often see the body hair stripped away. So we were putting it back in and making sure that we saw plenty of body hair. So it was just about trying to subvert what we associate with the sex industry, I think.
Yeah, and I think it was refreshing. I mean, it didn't come across as harsh in any way, and I think with that it kind of helped this story with Bella where she's exploring, you know, I mean, she doesn't have any shame about being in here, and she doesn't have any shame about who, you know, I love when she says, but can't I choose who I would have sex with? This would go much better, you know.
Because she'd actually quite enjoy it then.
Yeah, because she was like, well, okay, you know, I mean, and then just, it was almost like, that was kind of fitting of her world, of her expression in this. It's kind of this innocence way of, you know, you didn't walk in and it wasn't this scary environment, and it, you know, it wasn't horrible. It was the, you know, the women and the color of like, and their softness in their hair, and they didn't have. I mean, in one scene she has the most makeup she's probably had in the whole movie, but then it gradually kind of dissipates, and none of the women had really this garish makeup and garish clothes on, and I thought the brothel scene was just really, really beautiful.
It's delicate, isn't it? Yeah.
It's really delicate and really light, and you know, and almost welcoming, which I guess it should be. You know, it should be welcoming.
Actually, I loved going in. The brothel set was amazing. That was probably I think it was my favourite. It was just as you say, like a really welcoming, lovely environment to be in. I mean,
and also having this really petite little madam. That just almost was logical in ways, you know. It was explaining why you should do this, you know, and how this can benefit both of us. Yeah.
I loved doing her costume. So, Madame Swiney. I did her costume first because she lives in London. So she was, you know, very local, and I couldn't see any of the actors because they were all here. Most of them were here, or in New York, or, you know, we were in the pandemic at the time, so I couldn't fly to meet anybody. So I had to wait until I could see them in Budapest. So anyway, Madame Swiney, I was able to get her sort of on the boil well in advance. And, I wanted her to, when we did the fitting, she has this incredible physicality, Catherine Hunter. She's been a physical theatre performer, and she really can move, and she sort of darts about. And she said something in the fitting about how, you know, if she was an animal, she would be a spider monkey or something. And I thought, I can totally see that. And so I thought, well, we need to see her body. We can't just see her in this big, huge, I wanted her costume to almost feel like a chair, like a big upholstered piece of furniture. And that's why she is drowned in those sleeves. They're massive, and she is tiny. But then I loved the idea that at some point we would see the real her, and we'd see her body. And that's when she comes in. Then Nadia built on that idea and wanted to tattoo her all over. And I think that was a great thing, that we got to see her coming into the bedroom. You see her in, her body. She's tattooed. She's got a pair of pants on, I think, and a corset. And then she also just has a little stocking. We never really see any hair. She just has this turban that's always on her head. It feels like it's been, on her head forever. And underneath there's just a little stocking top. So, yeah.
Yeah, she's great. You had such a great span of characters to deal with.
Oh, and her makeup. I remember having these pictures of PJ Harvey, from the early 90s,
yeah.
when she used to do that blue eye makeup and that drawn-on eyebrow. And there's something about her physicality that also made me think of PJ Harvey. And that was, I think that was communicated somehow in what Nadia did, with her face and the makeup and everything.
It is. It's the really great eyebrows.
I love the way she did that. Yeah.
And then if you had to list some of your favorite costumes, I know it's quite hard, but were there things? Are there any costumes that hold something close to your heart because of either the reaction it got from the actor or because it was fabric you really loved and really, really wanted to use? Are there any bits like that are some of your favorites?
Yeah, I really, really, really love that lobster tail that's just there. I loved that because I'd seen in a like a costume history book something very close to that, not quite as a little bit more historical looking. And I just couldn't believe it when I saw it, that this was like a bustle, but it looked like a sort of Montclair quilted puffer thing. Because I've only ever seen the wire ones, metal ones.
I call them cages.
The cage ones. Yeah. And I was really wowed by that, so I wanted to recreate it and got a costume house called Cosprop, who were helping me with the costumes before I went to Hungary. They had to go making it, but I got the material all wrong. I gave them this really thick silk linen mix, and they made it, and it didn't work. It looked like a sort of judge's wig. It was all wrong, and I had to abandon it. It was just a failed attempt. And then I found this paper silk, this Bangladeshi paper silk, which is really, really thin, and I think that felt like a triumph because when we got the material qualities right, so it's paper silk with plastic crin lining it. A very brilliant corset maker came out to Hungary with that. She'd made it in her studio, and I was just thrilled with it.
It's beautiful.
I really like how she. I really like how she has that when in the garden when they're getting. I just like the way it's worn with her things. So that is my favourite thing in the whole film.
It's beautiful, and it is the thing like you're saying in the garden for me when I saw the scene, it is how you were explaining earlier about children's dressing. It's like that's probably her favorite piece. And then she's like wearing her favorite piece it doesn't matter if it goes with what she has on, but it's her favorite things.
And it's completely absurd because the whole point of something like that is to create a shape for the skirt that goes on top of it. So I really liked seeing these things that we never really get, we do sometimes, but often in period films, we see the top layer, don't we? We don't see the underpinnings.
How many underpinnings are
and
under things?
They're pretty fascinating things on their own. So I enjoyed that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Perfect. And then I don't know if we're opening to questions. Dare I ask that?
I mean, I think part of our job is gauging the people that we're working with, the actors, and knowing how far we can push them. Like, I think that is part of the job of the costume designer. And so actually, I probably wouldn't have proposed anything if I felt that they would be pushed back. And actually, they were all really embracing and really wanted that sort of level of playfulness and experimentation. So Mark Ruffalo's body padding and everything, we ended up with a really distilled version of that in the final edit. Like in the final film, we did camera tests with all of this crazy body padding that I'd done for him, but it was really like a bit too extreme for film. It would have been fine for a musical or a pantomime, but it was too much, and so we had to rein it in. But he seemed to really relish and enjoy that process of doing all of that. I think he probably found it quite useful for building his character. So I think maybe it's like knowing like will this work with this actor? because I didn't have any. I haven't had that experience with pushback so far.
Your own personal?
My own work. Oh, gosh. Trying to think. That's a tricky question, isn't
That
it?
is a tricky question. I think those questions
yeah.
for us sometimes are hard because when you're in a particular project, you're so focused on that particular
Yeah.
project and the creation process in that, you know, and you make so many costumes. That's why I kind of brought up as well about the background, which, you know, we're
Yes,
focused
yeah.
so much on Bella's costumes, which is the highlight of the film or because she's the lead, but there's so many costumes that you built and rented and bought and
Yeah.
reworked, and
I mean,
it's
so
thousands.
much, yeah.
It's really thousands
lot
of
of
costumes.
things, yeah.
So I think at some point we do get a bit of brain fog of, wait, what would be my favorite costume? You know, because so many have run through your head.
I mean, I did do this thing with. I did a collaboration with an artist back at home. He's called Hatain Patel. He's a very brilliant artist, and we made these costume. The brief was for the costume to start off looking like a West African wedding outfit, and it has to somehow transform during the action into something a bit martial artsy. And that was an amazing project. That piece actually got bought by the Tate. It's on permanent display at the Tate in St Ives. And I worked with a really fantastic prop maker, and we did origami that was all built into the costume. And the beauty of doing this costume on film was that we could stop the camera and change, like do all the origami transformations, so that the actual film is like the costume sort of all like being pulled and transformed and going from one shape into something completely different. So I did love that.
We're going to have to see that.
Yeah, but I don't know how to show you because it's owned by the Tate, so I can't put it on my website.
I think there's going to be a lot of
Annoying.
Googling this evening for the Tate and your name and this.
But you can't watch it unless you go to the Tate. That's the thing that's tricky about it. I'll have to ask Hatain. But I mean, I was very happy with that.
And they own the costume, or they have the film?
They have the film, and
Who
the
has
artist
the
has
costume?
the artist
Oh.
has the costume. It's a tricky, yeah. But it was just an example of how filmmaking and a costume could really do something that they couldn't do with it. You know, it was such a symbiotic thing, because, you know, on its own, hanging in a space, you know, it's like a puppet, this costume, but it doesn't puppeteer in real time. You need to do it on film. It was like an animation puppet thing.
Oh, very cool.
So I'll try and get that. I'll try and find a way to communicate that on my website at some point.
Yeah,
I'd love to explore that more, like do more things like that.
Right. Yeah, things that are
So-
kind of outside of what our normal realm is, because
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Or just for fun.
yes. Short projects.
Yeah, maybe. Actually, maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
The veil. So the veil, I remember sitting in my office the night before the wedding scene with the veil and thinking, how are we going to use this veil? Because she is not the kind of person that would really get married or wear a white wedding dress or definitely not wear a veil. So that was a very last minute thing to just sort of wrap it around her face. That was like
It looks great. Yeah.
How would Bella wear this, Emma? And we very quickly worked that out. The wedding dress was tricky and it was very talking about complicated makes and things that were, you know, that felt like a very like that is a piece that is I feel very strongly about, because I really had been thinking about it for a very, very long time, that it would be super light and airy and you could see her body through it, but it would feel like a cage because it had these bands going round in concentric circles, and also that the sleeves would be huge and feel as if they were filled with helium, but I didn't want to see loads of stuff inside them. So I wanted them to just be sort of almost floating. And so that was a technical challenge which I think really pushed certain people on my team to the point where they were really, really, really struggling, but like really sort of glad that it was all over. And I think Emma Stone really liked it because I think for her it felt like it was a big thing. It occupied a lot of space, but it also felt like she was wearing nothing. And she said something really nice in her interview, didn't she, about it being like a metaphor for sex and being confident but also vulnerable at the same time, which I thought was a nice thing to say.
Yeah, that piece
like
is
to see
really
that,
incredible
yeah.
because of
It's that one.
the sheerness that we could still
Super
see her
sheer.
body
Yeah.
through it, but there is so much structure there.
And because we were in Budapest, and we just couldn't, we just often, like, have you worked in Budapest?
I did.
Yes, yeah.
It's challenging
It's
because you don't have the stores and the quantity of
Exactly.
things that we
Yeah.
have here. Even the simplest of buttons.
Buttons, yeah,
Buttons is a big
exactly.
challenge for us in this business now.
Yeah, and also the fabrics, we have a really rich supply of things back in London, and in Budapest they just have a lot of synthetics really in the fabric shops, which are obviously very useful, but we things for a wedding dress, for example, for this one, we just use loads of millinery netting, for hat netting. Which is, plastic netting. So the dress is a layer of organza, a layer of hat netting, and then a layer of tulle, cotton tulle over the top. So you see that grid structure underneath. That's the millinery netting that's kind of trapped inside organza. And that's because that's what we had in the store cupboard. It was more that than because we thought it all through and shopped for it and got because we just needed to get the fabrics quickly.
And how many of that dress did you have?
Two.
Which is very scary for a white dress when filming.
Just
a structured white dress that took so
We
many
had
hours of love
two.
to make.
two, but I mean, one of them, somebody sent it to a normal dry cleaner.
Oh.
That was a disaster.
Oh. I'm surprised they took it. I'm
So
surprised they
was
would
I.
accept it to
Well,
dry
yeah, I
clean
know.
it. Yeah.
Because it's also made of plastic. So
Yes.
what happened is it grew by a foot.
Better than shrinking by a foot.
Yes. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how it grew by a foot, but it did. So it had to be redone. Anyway. Well, in the way that I do it, it's interesting to hear what how Trish compares to this. I would establish a new costume, make sure that so let's say the wedding dress was going to the set. I would take Emma to the set in her dress, make sure she felt really good in it, make sure that the director had seen it, and I talked to the standbys who stand by on the set with the actors and talk through the costume with them. This is the veil, don't let it move, this is how it's going to be knotted, what could go wrong with this dress, and talk them through that, and then watch a couple of takes, and then I would go off and get on with the next thing that I've got to do, and there's always a lot to do, so that's how I work. I don't really stay very long on the set. Once I'm happy with the first take, I probably go. I mean, unless there's not very much to do, but there was always a lot to do on Poor Things. So it's back to getting on with the next thing, really. Because what I've learned from doing Poor Things is that you just should follow your instincts. I think that's what I've learned just in general in life. You've got to follow your instincts. But when I read Poor Things, I saw the whole thing in black and white. I mean, that's just by the by. That's of no relevance, really. But what I did see was the half-dress thing. The fact that she would not ever be fully dressed, really. And that is what we ended up with. So these sorts of looks, so what I instinctively thought about and stuck, and probably the best thing about the costumes, really. It's quite funny because my mum has just been to stay this weekend because I had the great privilege of going to the BAFTAs this weekend.
Where she won.
Where I won. And she brought these photographs of me, my sister, and our childhood friends in our little village over the summer holidays. I would have been 11, my sister was younger, and we did a fashion show, and we did a collection, like it was a proper fashion show. We did 4 outfits each. That was the collection. So it was a set of between 14 and 20 outfits. And I was organising the whole thing. And I have these big, wide trousers made of bin bags, and then my grandmother's long-line bra that's all decorated. It's very, very inspired by Madonna. And a massive hat. And my sister's got this fishtail dress made out of red plastic bags. And properly made things as well. So, and we did the music, we did the food, we made it into a whole event. And my mum and dad always had these pictures on the kitchen where we're really posing in these outfits. So I've always been into dressing up. I've always loved it. And I think more than it being an interest in fashion, it's been about transformation. So I've always loved it when you feel yourself transforming into something else, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you look gorgeous. It means that you're like actually turning into another person. And I've always found that very thrilling. And I think that is what our job is, actually, isn't it?
It is.
We're
very fortunate the things I do like about it is I love working with I call it our tribe of people, where you work with so many different peoples, and we travel around the world, but it is that transformation. And for you, it's, with Mark Ruffalo, he was transformed into a character I've never seen him play before. And I think that's really, refreshing, and I'm sure very gratifying, because I know in fitting rooms, when you see the actor, try on your garments that you want them to wear, and you hope they identify with them, and you see the body change, or they start to walk differently, or they hold their posture differently. Yeah. That's really gratifying to us, as costume designers, that we can help facilitate building and developing characters.
Yeah. And of course it isn't, so much of what, Mark Ruffalo's character is his acting. But when I think about what he looks like as himself, he's like a really artistic, really cool guy with really great clothes. He's just so far removed from this character. And I think the clothes and the shapes and, they do combine, and they do help, create this deportment and this posture. And so to answer your question, yes, I was always designing things, making things, but also very interested in the history of clothes and what people used to wear. And when I went to art school, I thought that I wanted to do fashion, but I ended up going to art school. I just spent the whole time painting people wearing costumes, really, and doing things with patterns. And it was a tutor who said, "Are you sure you don't want to be a theatre designer? You seem to be a bit preoccupied with making sets and making costumes." So, that was, I probably was always very, it definitely feels like a very good job for me with my interests anyway. I feel very lucky to have this job. Yeah. Hello. Oh, my first job, like proper job connected to costume, or my. Yeah, I got a job working for Angel's Costume House when I was 23. So it's like a rental company, and they were taking graduates from art schools to train us to be, like, I was a ladies' historical costumer. And I did that. I was given a rail of clothes every morning, and I would have to tell my boss what everything was. And I didn't know. I thought the Tudor dresses were original. That's how much I didn't know. I remember saying, "This is amazing. Is it original?" Yeah. And it was made out of like 70s sofa fabric and had plastic jewels all over it. I was clueless. Really.
Reproductions.
They were reproductions from the 70s, but I had a lot to learn. So through this process of, because if you take loads of historical costumes and break them down into their different components and put them on a rail, it is quite hard to say, well, that's a 1960s pair of ski pants, and it's made of crimpline, and this is an Edwardian blouse, and white, and then this is a 1950s, early 50s French jacket. So that's what I was doing, and sorting out, pairing gloves and putting things away, really. Did that for a long time. Oh, well, it was a no-brainer, because I really love Yorgos's work, and I really like his films, and so it was a bit of a dream project. Just to be asked to read the script, I just knew that I would want to do it. I also knew Tony McNamara, who wrote the script. I'd already worked with him on The Great, which was a TV series, a Hulu TV series about Catherine the Great. So I did the pilot episode of that, and I had got on very well with him. So I just had a feeling that I was going. I mean, I really wanted the job, and I was asked to meet on the Monday morning. I got the script on the Friday. It was just before Christmas, and I just cancelled everything that I was doing, and just quickly ordered the book. Got the bookshop. The local bookshop had the book ready for me the next day. Devoured the book. Devoured the script. Raced to this bookshop. Got a book on Japanese dolls to take to Yorgos. So I just really wanted to do it. No.
Yeah. We're very tactile people, and that kind of doesn't. I mean, look, I think obviously we know in the world we all live in that can serve purposes in many ways, and I think each person has to figure out what works for them.
Yeah.
But I think for us, for me, it's not something that works. Yeah.
I think you've just said it. I'm very tactile. I'm very physical. So I don't really enjoy working with computers in any way in my work. Like, I'm quite a Luddite, really, and very, very old. Like, I could be doing what I do like in the 19th century. Like, I work with people who are like that too. You know, we're all like really into the feeling of everything, and everything's done with our hands, and I like drawing and making. So I can't even imagine how that even looks, or how you'd begin with that. I'm sure it's possible.
I'd have to say, I think we're out of time now. Yep, sorry, we're out of time.
Okay.
I want to thank everybody for coming.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
Such a beautiful, wonderful turnout.
thank you.
I'd love to thank Holly for being here.
Thank you very much.
She just flew in and showed up and looked stunning and had answered all our questions. And if you haven't seen Poor Things, which I'm sure you all already have, if you have not seen Poor Things, please run out and see it. It's such a beautiful, really refreshing, very creative film. It's very visually stunning. Congratulations to Holly.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Good to see you all. Thanks, Trish.